Alastair Sterling, a man whose wealth was so old it had developed its own gravitational pull, adjusted the silk knot of his tie and delivered the final, crushing blow. He stood on the witness stand, a portrait of aggrieved aristocracy, his voice echoing with practiced sorrow through the cavernous, wood-paneled courtroom. "I treated her like family," he lamented, his gaze sweeping over the jury, a shepherd tending his flock. "And she repaid that trust by stealing a piece of my heritage. The Devereux necklace, an heirloom passed down through my wife's family since the French Revolution." He gestured with a dismissive flick of his wrist toward the defendant's table, where Sarah Thorne sat, small and still, her public defender shuffling papers with the frantic energy of a man already defeated. Sarah's hands were clasped so tightly in her lap that her knuckles were white islands in a sea of dark skin. She was a maid, a good one, honest. But in this room, against this man, her character was a currency with no value. The prosecutor, a young man eager to make a name by felling a giant's housekeeper, nodded gravely. The judge, a man who had likely attended fundraisers at Sterling's estate, peered down from his perch with an expression of weary disappointment aimed squarely at Sarah. The air was thick with the certainty of her guilt. It was a story as old as the courthouse itself, power accusing powerlessness, and the scales of justice tipping obediently toward the gold. In the last row of the public gallery, a boy sat unnoticed. Leo Thorne, all of 12 years old, was a whisper in the loud room. His worn jeans were a size too short, his sneakers scuffed at the toes, a stark contrast to the polished marble floors and the gleam of expensive leather briefcases. His mother had told him to stay home, her eyes wide with a fear that was more terrifying to him than any monster under the bed. "This is no place for a child," she had pleaded. But he had come anyway, slipping in the back, a silent sentinel for the only person in his world. In his lap, he held a small, worn leather journal, its cover softened by decades of handling. His thumb stroked the faded initials embossed on the front. M. T. Marcus Thorne. His grandfather. Leo wasn't just watching the proceedings. He was observing, the way his grandfather had taught him. He saw the things others missed. He saw the almost imperceptible tremor in Mr. Sterling's left hand as he gestured toward his heart. He saw the way the prosecutor's polished shoes were angled slightly away from the jury box, a subconscious tell of someone who doesn't fully believe their own argument. His grandfather's voice was a low hum in his memory, a lesson from years ago as they sat on the porch steps. "People look, Leo," he'd said, his voice raspy from a life of unfiltered cigarettes and hard-won truths. "They look at the big picture, the loud noises. You gotta learn to see. See the stitches, not just the suit. That's where the truth hides." Leo saw the stitches now, and they were all coming undone. The prosecutor delivered his final, theatrical flourish. "Mr. Sterling, is there any doubt in your mind, any possibility of a mistake, that it was your maid, Sarah Thorne, who you saw leaving the study moments before you discovered the necklace was missing?" Sterling leaned into the microphone, his voice a stage whisper meant to carry to every corner. "It pains me to say it. It truly does. But there is no doubt whatsoever." He then added a flourish of cruelty, a little joke for the privileged. "I suppose she simply couldn't resist the sparkle. A common affliction, I'm told." A few sycophantic titters rippled through the front rows. The public defender stood, cleared his throat, and offered a feeble, "No further questions, Your Honor." The judge nodded, ready to instruct the jury on a verdict that felt preordained. The gavel was already rising, a wooden bird of prey beginning its descent. The impossible challenge had been issued and met with silence. The room held its breath, waiting for the inevitable hammer fall of injustice. This was how the world worked. A maid, a necklace, a rich man's word. The story wrote itself. A voice, clear and quiet as a falling pin, sliced through the tension. "He's lying." Every head turned, a slow, collective swivel toward the back of the courtroom. Leo Thorne was on his feet. He was small for his age, but his posture was ramrod straight, as if anchored to the floor by an unseen weight. The judge's eyes narrowed into slits of irritation. "Excuse me? Who is speaking?" The bailiff started forward, a large man moving with purpose. Sarah's head snapped up, her eyes locking with her son's, a silent, desperate plea for him to sit down, to be quiet, to not make this worse. Her public defender hissed, "Son, you need to sit down now." But Leo's gaze was fixed on the man in the witness box. "Mr. Sterling is lying," he repeated, his voice gaining a strange, calm authority that did not belong to a child. "My grandfather taught me to always check the load-bearing walls of a man's story. His has none," Alastair Sterling scoffed, a theatrical puff of indignation. "Your Honor, must we be subjected to this juvenile delinquency?" The judge banged his gavel. "Young man, you are in contempt. One more word." But Leo didn't flinch. "I would like to ask Mr. Sterling one question," he said, his tone respectful but unyielding. It was an act of pure folly, an ant challenging an elephant. The public defender put his head in his hands. The prosecutor smirked. But the jury was watching Leo. The judge, perhaps thrown by the sheer audacity of the request, or perhaps sensing a flicker of something extraordinary, hesitated. The room was silent. "One question," the judge finally conceded, his voice heavy with warning. "Make it a good one." Leo nodded, a small, grateful dip of his head. He ignored the furious glare from Sterling and the panicked look from his mother. He held the room in his small grasp. "Mr. Sterling," he began, his voice steady. "You testified that on the night of the theft, you came home late, around 11 p.m., from a dinner at the club. Is that correct?" Sterling rolled his eyes, the picture of a man tolerating an imbecile. "Yes, as I've already stated for the record, that is correct," Leo continued. "And you said it was raining heavily that night, a veritable deluge," Sterling confirmed, enjoying the sound of his own vocabulary. "I recall my driver complaining about the visibility." Leo's focus sharpened. "So your shoes would have been wet when you entered the house." A flicker of confusion crossed Sterling's face. "Presumably. What on earth is the point of this?" The prosecutor stood. "Objection, Your Honor. Relevance. I'll allow it." The judge grumbled, his curiosity now piqued. "Answer the question, Mr. Sterling." Sterling let out an exasperated sigh. "Fine. Yes. My shoes were wet." He then leaned forward, his mask of civility slipping to reveal the snarling contempt beneath. He locked eyes with Sarah. "This little stunt will cost you dearly," he said, his voice low but carrying in the hushed room. "I will see to it that your husband is fired from my factory by morning. I will see to it you are evicted from the apartment you rent in my building by noon. I will personally ensure your family is ruined. Is this little game your boy is playing worth that?" Sarah visibly shrank, the threat landing like a physical blow. Tears welled in her eyes as she looked at Leo, her expression a mixture of terror and pleading. Leo's face remained a calm, unreadable mask. He met Sterling's threatening gaze without a trace of fear. He remembered another of his grandfather's lessons, whispered over a chessboard one long ago afternoon. "Fear is just noise, son. A big, loud distraction. The truth is quiet. You have to listen for it underneath all the yelling." He could hear the quiet truth now. He turned his attention back to the line of questioning, as if Sterling's threat had been nothing more than a cough. "Mr. Sterling, you testified that you walked directly from the foyer, across the Persian rug, and into your study to place your briefcase on the desk, and it was then you noticed the safe was ajar." Yes, that is what happened," Sterling snapped, his patience gone. Leo's next words were simple, but they landed with the force of a battering ram. "The cleaning report for that night, which is in evidence as Exhibit C, states that the Persian rug in the foyer had just been steam cleaned that afternoon. My mother noted it was still slightly damp. If your shoes were wet from a deluge, as you say, and you walked directly across that rug, you would have left wet footprints. But the crime scene photos, Exhibit D, show no footprints or watermarks of any kind on that rug. Not a single 1 inch." The public defender's head shot up. The prosecutor's smirk vanished. A low murmur swept through the jury box. For the first time, a visible crack appeared in Alastair Sterling's perfect facade. The story's load-bearing wall had just been tested, and it groaned under the pressure. The courtroom was utterly still. The silence was no longer one of passive acceptance, but of rapt attention. Every eye was on the small boy in the worn jeans. Sterling, flustered for the first time, began to bluster. That's absurd. Perhaps the rug had dried. Perhaps I took my shoes off." "You testified you were in a hurry," Leo countered softly. "You said you went straight to the study. You never mentioned taking off your shoes." The foundation was crumbling. Leo felt the shift in the room, the transfer of power from the witness stand to the gallery. He pressed on, his voice remaining level. respectful. Your Honor, may I have the primary piece of evidence, the velvet necklace box, brought forward? The judge, now leaning forward with undisguised fascination, nodded to the clerk. The box was brought to the witness stand and placed before a visibly sweating Alastair Sterling. Mr. Sterling, Leo said, please look at that box. You stated you found it empty on the floor, but you also said you were the last person to handle the necklace itself, placing it in the safe 2 days prior. Can you describe how you closed the necklace's clasp? Sterling, trying to regain his composure, scoffed. It's a simple clasp. I snapped it shut, as anyone would. Leo then asked for the necklace itself to be presented. It was a cascade of diamonds, brilliant even under the courtroom's dull lighting. But Leo wasn't looking at the stones. His eyes were fixed on the small, intricate piece of platinum at the back. That is a Mark IV pressure clasp, Leo announced, his voice ringing with a certainty that was chilling. It was designed for high-value pieces to prevent snatch-and-grab thefts. It doesn't snap shut. It requires 2 hands and a specific quarter-turn twist to both open and close. My grandfather called it a 2-step lock. A collective gasp went through the room. The prosecutor was frantically whispering to his aide. Sterling's face, a moment ago flushed with anger, was now pale as parchment. He stared at the clasp as if seeing a ghost. Leo, seeing his advantage, moved to the final, irrefutable point. He pulled the worn leather journal from under his arm and held it up. My grandfather was Sergeant Marcus Thorne, he said, his voice swelling with a pride that filled the space around him. He served for 20 years as a clerk in the Judge Advocate General's Corps, and after he retired, he worked as a private investigator's aide. He specialized in insurance fraud cases. For 30 years, he kept notes. He studied locks, safes, security systems, and liars. He opened the journal to a bookmark page. On it was a perfect, hand-drawn diagram of the Mark IV pressure clasp, complete with technical notes in his grandfather's spidery script. He wrote here, Leo read, his voice clear and strong. A liar builds his house with rotten wood and bad nails. All you have to do is find the right spot and push. The whole thing will come down. He then looked directly at the jury. Mr. Sterling's story is a house of rotten wood. The timeline is wrong. The evidence of the wet rug is missing, and he doesn't even know how to work the clasp on his own family heirloom. He pointed a steady finger at the velvet box still on the stand. And if you look closely at the bottom of that box, you'll find a faint smudge of industrial grease. The same kind used in the hydraulic lift in his private garage, a part of the mansion my mother has never been allowed to enter. He didn't come through the front door. He came from the garage, after hiding the necklace, to stage a theft for the insurance money. Chaos. The word was insufficient for the explosion that detonated in the courtroom. Reporters were scrambling for the doors. The prosecutor looked physically ill. The judge was banging his gavel, not with irritation now, but with the frantic energy of a man who has completely lost control of his ship in a storm. Alastair Sterling simply slumped in the witness chair, a deflated monarch, his empire of lies collapsing around him in a pile of dust and diamonds. The judge, his face a thunderous mask, bellowed, "Case dismissed. The defendant is free to go." He then turned his wrathful gaze upon the district attorney. "I expect a full investigation into perjury and felony insurance fraud to be opened against Mr. Sterling before I leave this bench today." Sarah Thorne was sobbing, but these were not the silent, helpless tears of before. They were shuddering, cathartic sobs of relief and vindication. She rushed to Leo, wrapping him in an embrace so fierce it lifted him from the floor. Her fear was gone, burned away by the bright, clean fire of the truth her son had revealed. As they were swarmed by a throng of reporters and well-wishers, a distinguished-looking man in a tailored suit leaned in close to Leo. "Young man," he whispered, pressing a business card into his hand. "That was the finest piece of litigation I have ever witnessed. When you're ready for college and law school, it's on me. All of it." Leo looked at the card, then up at his mother's beaming, tear-streaked face. He had won more than a case. He had reclaimed his family's honor and ignited his own future, all with the quiet wisdom passed down in a worn leather book. 6 months later, the scent of sawdust and old paper filled a small, sunlit room. The Thorne family was in a new house, a modest but sturdy brick bungalow on a quiet, tree-lined street. The settlement from the civil suit they'd filed against a now bankrupt and disgraced Alastair Sterling had been more than enough to secure their future. Sarah, no longer a maid, was enrolled in night classes at the local community college, studying to open her own small business. Her husband, freed from Sterling's factory, had found a better-paying job as a foreman at a competing company. The transformation was total. At the center of the room sat a large, magnificent oak desk, its surface scarred with the history of 1,000 late nights. It was his grandfather's desk, rescued from a dusty storage unit. And at the desk sat Leo. He was surrounded by books, not comic books, but thick, heavy tomes on constitutional law and torts, sent by his new benefactor. On a corner of the desk, in a place of honor, sat the worn leather journal and a small, polished frame containing his grandfather's military dog tags. Pinned to the wall above the desk was a letter, its letterhead bearing the crest of one of the nation's most prestigious universities, offering a full scholarship. Leo was no longer just a boy, he was a legacy. He ran his hand over the cover of the journal, the leather as familiar as his own skin. He had not only cleared his mother's name, he had given voice to the quiet, persistent wisdom of the man who had taught him how to see. He looked up at a framed photograph on the desk, a young Sergeant Marcus Thorne, smiling, his eyes sharp and knowing. A silent promise passed between the boy and the ghost. The world was full of loud, powerful men who built their houses from lies. And he, Leo Thorne, armed with a quiet truth and a grandfather's wisdom, was ready to push.